It was a bright Monday morning in the bustling city. The towering glass building of Crawford Enterprises gleamed under the sun, a testament to the wealth and power of its CEO, Ethan Crawford. Ethan was known for his sharp business acumen, but equally for his arrogance and cold demeanor. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, Ethan strolled into the lobby, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He glanced around with an air of superiority, barely acknowledging the greetings from his employees. His eyes fell on a janitor wiping the edges of the reception desk. Her uniform was plain and slightly worn, her hair tied back in a messy bun. "You missed a spot," Ethan said curtly, pointing at a small smudge on the desk. The janitor looked up, her hazel eyes meeting his. "I'll get to it right away, sir," she replied softly, her voice steady but respectful. Ethan's lip curled into a smirk. "You should try to be more efficient. This company doesn't pay people to slack off." A faint blush crept across her cheeks, but she didn't respond. She simply nodded and went back to her work, her hands moving with quiet determination. Ethan shook his head dismissively and walked off to the elevator, already forgetting the exchange. Little did he know, this janitor's story was far more complex and extraordinary than he could ever imagine. It was an unusually quiet afternoon at Crawford Enterprises. The hum of printers and muted conversations blending into the background. Ethan, needing a quick jolt of caffeine to power through his packed schedule, made his way to the break room. The clinking sound of a coffee mug on the countertop accompanied his footsteps. As he stepped inside, he paused, his eyes falling on a familiar figure. The janitor, the same one who had caught his attention in the lobby a few days ago, was there. She was scrubbing the counters with slow, deliberate movements, her focus entirely on her task. Ethan watched her for a moment, intrigued by the way she carried herself. Despite her modest uniform and the nature of her work, there was a certain poise to her actions. A quiet confidence that seemed out of place. Ethan cleared his throat as he moved toward the coffee machine. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. The woman stopped mid-swipe and turned to face him. Her hazel eyes, framed by tired but kind features, met his without hesitation. "Emma," she replied simply, her tone polite but guarded. Ethan nodded, taking in her calm demeanor. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Just a few months," Emma said, her hands resuming their rhythmic cleaning. He raised an eyebrow. "And before that?" There was a brief pause. Emma's hands stilled for a moment, and something unreadable flashed across her face. Her gaze dropped to the counter, and her voice softened. "Different jobs," she said finally, her words carefully chosen. Ethan studied her for a moment, sensing that there was more to her story than she was letting on. But his curiosity only went so far. He shrugged, brushing the thought aside. "Well, carry on then," he said dismissively, waving a hand as if to close the conversation. Emma nodded without looking at him and returned to her task, her movements as steady as before. Ethan turned and left the room, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. As he walked back to his office, Ethan found himself distracted. There was something about Emma that lingered in his mind. Her calmness, her composed responses, and the hint of emotion behind her eyes unsettled him. She didn't fit the image he had of someone in her position, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he found himself wondering who she really was. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Crawford felt the faint stirrings of curiosity that went beyond his world of contracts, profits, and board meetings. The grand gala was the talk of the city, a celebration of Crawford Enterprises' latest triumphs. The banquet hall, located on the top floor of the gleaming corporate tower, was transformed into a vision of opulence. Golden drapes cascaded from the walls, crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars, and the tables were adorned with fine china and fresh bouquets of roses. The room buzzed with energy as the city's elite gathered, their laughter and conversation echoing through the hall. Ethan Crawford stood in the center of it all, exuding confidence. Dressed in a tailored midnight blue suit, he moved effortlessly from one group to the next, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. His charm was on full display, his every word calculated to impress. Investors hung on his every word, clients praised his vision, and the air around him seemed to hum with his authority. But amidst the glamour and grandeur, Emma moved quietly in the background, her presence barely noticeable. She wore the same modest uniform, a stark contrast to the lavish evening gowns and expensive suits around her. While the guests indulged in champagne and hors d'oeuvres, Emma worked diligently, clearing plates, collecting glasses, and ensuring the room remained pristine. As Ethan sipped from a glass of wine, his sharp eyes caught sight of her, near one of the tables. She was reaching for an empty glass, her movements as precise and unassuming as ever. His mood, buoyed by the evening's success, suddenly soured. He strode over, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, and spoke in a voice that cut through the ambient chatter. "Don't you have other places to be?" Emma straightened, the glass still in her hand. Her hazel eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she replied calmly, though a faint blush crept up her cheeks. Ethan's lip curled in disdain. "This is a high-profile event," he snapped. "Try not to ruin the ambiance." His words carried through the room, drawing the attention of nearby guests. A few heads turned, their curious gazes settling on the scene. Whispered conversations began to ripple through the crowd, the atmosphere shifting ever so slightly. Emma's face flushed deeper, but her composure didn't waver. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation. Ethan waved her off dismissively. "Well, do it somewhere else," he said, his tone curt and final. Emma nodded, her expression unreadable, and walked away, her footsteps soft against the floor. She returned to the service area, her hands gripping the tray she carried with more force than necessary. As she set it down, her shoulders sagged, and for a moment she stood still, her head bowed. Memories she had tried to suppress for months began to surface, unbidden and relentless. The echoes of loss, the pain of starting over, and the weight of being reduced to a shadow of her former self washed over her like a tide she couldn't hold back. Her hands trembled as she reached for a cloth, clinging to her work as a lifeline. But beneath the sting of Ethan's words, a spark of resolve burned. She had endured far worse than a public scolding, and though her past remained hidden, it was not something she was ashamed of. The night wore on, the guests oblivious to the inner storm Emma fought to contain. But one thing was certain. This encounter would not fade as easily as Ethan might have expected. A typical Tuesday morning at Crawford Enterprises found Ethan presiding over a high-stakes board meeting. The room was filled with the steady hum of discussion. PowerPoint slides flickering across the screen as executives pitched ideas to secure the company's future success. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his sharp mind dissecting every proposal with precision. Just as the next presenter prepared to speak, a soft knock came at the door. Ethan glanced up, his expression impatient. His assistant, a usually unflappable young woman, peeked in hesitantly. "Mr. Crawford," she said softly, "someone is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Ethan frowned, his irritation evident. "I'm in the middle of a meeting. Tell her to wait." The assistant hesitated, her demeanor uncharacteristically uneasy. "She insists, sir. It's Emma, the janitor." Ethan's brow furrowed, and for a moment annoyance flared. What could she possibly have to say that warranted interrupting a board meeting? But as much as he wanted to dismiss her, something in the assistant's tone made him pause. Curiosity, unbidden but persistent, gnawed at the edges of his mind. With a curt nod, he excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Emma stood there, her posture firm and unyielding, a quiet determination radiating from her. She wasn't the same unassuming figure he'd dismissed days ago. "This better be important," Ethan said, his tone sharp as he folded his arms. Emma didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her eyes steady and resolute. "It is," she replied calmly. She reached into the worn leather bag slung over her shoulder and pulled out a neatly organized folder. Handing it to him, she said, "I thought you should know who you've been looking down on." Ethan hesitated, his curiosity now fully piqued. He opened the folder, flipping through its contents. At first, his expression remained indifferent, but as his eyes scanned the pages, his face slowly changed. The first document was a degree from one of the world's most prestigious universities, a symbol of academic excellence that many could only dream of. Next came a series of awards and certificates recognizing Emma's contributions to the finance industry, followed by glowing recommendations from former colleagues. But what struck him most was the newspaper clipping nestled among the papers. The headline read, Tragic accident claims family of finance star Emma Whitmore. The article detailed a devastating car crash that had taken the lives of her husband and young daughter, leaving Emma not only grief-stricken but also financially ruined. "I lost everything," Emma said quietly, her voice steady despite the obvious pain in her words. "My family, my home, my career. But I didn't lose my dignity. I took this job to start over, not to be shamed for it." Ethan's throat tightened as he reread the documents, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had spent years navigating high-stakes negotiations and outsmarting competitors, yet here he stood, utterly speechless. For the first time, a pang of guilt pierced through his carefully constructed armor. He realized how blind he had been, how quick to judge without ever understanding. Emma stood there for a moment longer, watching him process the truth. Then, with a quiet dignity that matched her words, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone in the hallway, with the undeniable weight of his actions. The revelation of Emma's past lingered in Ethan's mind like an unresolved chord. For days, her words echoed in his thoughts, breaking through his usual focus. He found himself distracted during meetings, his sharp wit dulled by an unfamiliar sensation: guilt. He couldn't stop thinking about the folder's contents. Emma wasn't just some anonymous worker in the background. She was a woman of remarkable strength, someone who had climbed unimaginable heights only to be knocked down by cruel twists of fate. Yet she hadn't let the weight of her losses crush her spirit. The next morning, as Ethan entered the office lobby, his eyes instinctively sought Emma. She was there, mopping the floor with her usual quiet efficiency, her focus unwavering. For the first time, Ethan truly looked at her, not as a janitor, not as someone beneath him, but as a human being with a story. Summoning his courage, he approached her. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, catching her attention. She straightened, turning to face him, her expression neutral, but her gaze sharp. "Emma," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "I owe you an apology." She blinked, clearly surprised. "For what?" "For the way I treated you," Ethan said, his tone sincere. "I was wrong. I judged you without knowing anything about you. That was unacceptable." He hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. "You deserve better." Emma studied him, her expression unreadable. "It's not easy to admit when we're wrong," she said after a moment. "But thank you. I appreciate it." Ethan nodded, the tension in his chest easing slightly, but he wasn't done. "I've been thinking a lot about what you showed me," he continued. "Your skills, your achievements, they're extraordinary. This company could use someone like you, in a role that matches your abilities." Emma tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "And what role would that be?" "I'd like to offer you a position in our finance department," Ethan said. "Your background speaks for itself, and I believe you could make a real difference here." Emma's eyes widened slightly. For a moment she said nothing, her mind racing. It had been years since anyone had acknowledged her potential, let alone offered her an opportunity like this. "I'll think about it," she said finally, a small cautious smile playing on her lips. Ethan nodded. "Take your time," he said. "And Emma, thank you. You've reminded me of something important: to see people for who they are, not where they happen to be." In the weeks that followed, Emma took the offer. Her transition into the finance department was seamless, her expertise and determination quickly earning the respect of her colleagues. She worked tirelessly, her sharp mind and strategic thinking breathing new life into the team. Ethan, too, began to change. He made a conscious effort to connect with his employees, regardless of their position. He took the time to learn their stories, to understand their challenges, and to offer support where he could. Slowly but surely, the icy barrier he had built around himself began to thaw. Months passed, and Crawford Enterprises thrived under Emma's influence. Her innovative ideas and fresh perspective brought in new clients and revitalized old strategies. But more than that, she became a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that second chances could lead to extraordinary outcomes. One morning, as Ethan stood in the office lobby, he watched Emma greet a group of new hires with a warm smile. She exuded confidence and grace, her presence commanding yet approachable. Ethan felt a sense of pride, not in himself, but in her. Their paths had crossed under less than ideal circumstances, but the journey that followed had changed them both. Ethan had learned to see beyond appearances, to value character over status, and Emma, through her quiet strength, had found her way back to the life she was always meant to lead. In the end, their story became more than just a tale of redemption. It was a testament to the power of humility, resilience, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to rise again. Thank you so much for watching this story. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to like the video and comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with your friends and family so they can enjoy it too. Lastly, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story. Your support helps us create more meaningful content, and we can't do it without you. Thank you for being a part of our community.